Okay, welcome everybody to another live stream on what is a Friday afternoon for me. Welcome to Highfield Oval, Wyvern Harpenden. Still in the tail end, we hope, of lockdown, but enjoying the good weather. And I'm in the fourth in a series of discussions that have arisen out of this particular book called Reinventing Organizations. Get out of my face there. And I'll explain why this has been exciting to me. But before we get into that, I'm going to be answering questions today. And I want to give a little recap of the context for this, but also just wanted to remind you this is available YouTube and Facebook live stream, and then will be posted not too long from now on my blog, lynngreen.net or com or org, and will also be posted on Spotify as a podcast. So thanks very much for joining me, and thanks for all the really excellent questions. There's been a lot of interest in this, and I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by it because, just to repeat a little bit, Lauren had that word from the Lord, and periodically he gets downloads. Now, other people have words from the Lord for a while. I'm like Tom Bloomer's word about pruning. But from time to time, Lauren gets a word, and it's very common now, I see, that when he gets that, and let's say I can think of 4 or 5 times, where it has an immediate application, and then some of it doesn't quite make sense. And over time, it starts to make sense. So, 2010, he had this word about circles, cycles and circuits too, but the focus today is circles. And we immediately began to work on applying that because it was consistent with other things God had said to us. It was like a confirmation. So we, within a few years, these things move slowly when you're as large and global as we are. Within a few years, we had flattened out our hierarchical leadership structures with directors over continents and directors over nations and all that, into area circle teams and into a national or a global sort of way of looking at ourselves, which is no longer very hierarchical. It's flattened out quite a lot, and without people having positions that meant they were kind of the final authority on things. There's a reason why we did that, and we could see it clearly on that, and it's a reason that I think applies to the local as well, but we've been struggling to find out until this book by Frederick Laloux came along. We've been struggling to work out how it works locally. But here's what it's doing. There's a not only natural, there's an inevitable progression in the development of any organization. That is, when people get together and get themselves in some sort of order to accomplish something. And that is that it gets increasingly complicated if it grows. And of course, over the last 4 or 5 decades, the growth of government regulation has been, the word that comes to mind is horrendous. I probably shouldn't call it that, but we need some of it. And here's a principle. The less we behave in an ethical manner, the more we have to have regulations. So with society abandoning a lot of the universal values we used to live by, which were fairly consistent with biblical Christian values, we just need more and more regulation. What that means is that when we organize ourselves and try to accomplish something, we tend to get more and more complicated in our structures because you have to comply with regulations, and you have to do your accounts. You have to be careful about visas. You have to be careful about safeguarding children. You have to be careful about having proper board meetings and reporting to either a company's house or charity commissioners or the nonprofit oversight. There's all kinds of things like that but besides just local laws for how you build and how you run things, sanitation laws, health laws on kitchens, it gets complicated. The result of that is that you have to have responsible people who will consistently do those things and make sure they're done well, or you get shut down. The people who will consistently do those things that become fairly routine well tend to be people who are on the risk aversion and conservative side. And they're desperately important for any movement trying to work over a long period of time. But there's also a natural issue that arises all the time, which is they have this responsibility. They need authority. And just in a slow process, the people who come into decision-making authority, either internationally or nationally or locally or whatever, tend to be the real responsible, conservative, risk-averse personalities who we desperately need. But when they have final decision-making authority, then we make it difficult to continue to comply with our values, which is we do new things in new ways. And we're a youth organization because youth aren't attracted to something that's stable and doesn't change and is reliable. Some youth are, but very few. And yet, the people who have order and want to keep order really struggle with some of the, not to put too fine of a point on it, harebrained ideas that people come up with. So that's the tension we live in. Nobody's wrong in that tension. What's wrong is how we sometimes try to resolve the tension. And we have to find ways of resolving that tension that builds relationships, disciples one another, and still enables us to be Youth with a Mission, a youth movement doing new things in new ways, visionary, big ideas that young people can go out and start implementing. So that's where I think this particular book has been helpful, because what the author, Lalou, L-A-L-O-U-X, a Frenchman, has researched is companies and organizations that make room for people to make decisions at any level in the organization. And that is so compatible with our basic values, our sort of cornerstone values of knowing God, making Him known, hearing God, hearing His voice and obeying. Because when we really believe Jesus is the head of the church, and that anybody and everybody who loves Him and who is walking in faith can hear His voice, then you know that initiative, decisions even, and responsibility and authority are operable at all levels or with everybody within an organization. In fact, as the levels kind of disappear. But how do you do that without having chaos? And that has been the question, and that's some of the questions here that I will expand on as I go. But I also just want to remind you, if you have come into the middle of this series or at this point, that this is about, first of all, you can't do this unless you have three things in place. One is a really strong sense of what your values are, and I think in YWAM we have that. I've just been meeting with the Founders Circle online, and we are just doing a little refining edit of the values. We do that every so often, and that's our primary responsibility as a Founders Circle, the few of us who are around Lawn and Dar. We work on editing, refining, bringing them up to date, expanding them so that they really reflect what we believe God is saying, even as the world changes. So our values are strong, and vision has to be strong. And our vision is really clear. I hope every YWAM location has it, which is we are waves. Waves of young people, waves going out and going out and going out until they cover the whole earth. So it's the gospel everywhere. But then you add to that, there are many other words that we've had, but the simple way to do this is the waves and then the Christian Magna Carta, where everybody has a right to hear the gospel. Everybody has a right to fellowship with other believers. Everybody has a right to education for their children that is consistent with Christian principles and on. You know, everybody has a right to health care, food, etc. And when we take the gospel in that sort of fleshed out way to the whole world, that's our vision. And it's not hard to understand, but it's very comprehensive. So those things are in place. The other thing that has to be in place is we have to work in teams. Well, that's another one of our values. Sometimes our team structures don't get, well, they're not as strong as they should be. And one of the things that Lalou discovered is that these incredibly competitive, highly successful, revolutionary organizations, sometimes they're service companies like home care nurses, sometimes they're manufacturing companies like automotive parts, but these organizations are amazingly inventive, and because people in all parts of the organization are making decisions. So the question is, how do they do that without chaos? Well, I emphasized that last week. It's with advice. It's just been in a situation now where somebody made a decision. They didn't take advice from the key people who are influenced by the decision, or the key people who were involved historically with the situation that was impacted by it, who knew the history, knew the parameters, didn't take advice, made a decision, created a lot of conflict. Why? Well, which your decision is being made. And that's just good leadership. A leader who doesn't take advice, who doesn't seek counsel, who doesn't periodically have consultants around to see how things are going and give them a fresh pair of eyes, that kind of leader is going to get stale and going to have issues they don't even know about because the final thing in the steps for a harmonious way that works is good and consistent training, always updated on how to resolve conflicts between people. And there I noticed that, like many business consultancy books, they have happened upon a process. This is exactly like Matthew 18. Again and again, successful business leadership books end up discovering, whether by accident or people are wise to it, discovering biblical principles that they apply. So that's the background. And now let's look at some of these questions. So was that just for then? And the answer is, well, actually, at the beginning of things, often the only way you can function is with singular leadership. Lauren started that way in YWAM. I started that way, Marty and I, in YWAM England. I got to remember that it was Marty and me, because she's always made a major contribution, and a contribution which sometimes I'm really amenable to, and sometimes I resist for up to 2 or 3 days until I work out that she's right. But you often start that way when you're pioneering, but as soon as you start attracting people, you need to start involving others in the process of decision making. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I made early on. My idea was that the leader was the person who held all the information, didn't usually share that information, knew about the finances, knew about the relationships around them and all the rest. And the leader makes the decision and the people follow. And that doesn't raise up leaders, and it means that really capable people don't follow very long. They leave, because every human being wants to be trusted and wants to have responsibility. So yeah, I do think that Moses' leadership was for then. It was for the beginning of the nation of Israel, had to be that. But then he broadened it out fairly soon to the 70, and then to the tribal leaders and the patriarchs and on. So he was God's anointed leader. But later on, that leadership had to be distributed. And of course, the main thing is we're in a new covenant. And when Jesus came, he changed everything. And he also changed leadership structures. He did not leave behind one big man. You read the book of Acts and you read the epistles, and you don't get the picture of one person leading the church, not at all. So for those parts of the church who feel that is the structure, I don't see it in Scripture. Second question is, if you're going to have teams at local level, like I'm suggesting, how would they form? And I think, ideally, teams always form around vision. So it's been my experience that you put together a team by, first of all, the way it works in YWAM, usually, and I think normally, is God speaks to somebody. And they have a vision. They have something that they have zeal about, they're excited about. And you find out if they're a leader by watching to see if anybody joins with them. And I've always found, whether it's me or somebody else in my sphere of knowledge, somebody comes along with a vision and they declare the vision, and if they're a leader, people follow, and a team is formed. And the way I see it is that all of our operating locations, bases, communities, campuses, whatever you call them, should be environments where new teams form because God speaks to somebody. They get excited about something, and they start declaring that they have a vision, and their zeal is magnetic. Now, they also go through the process of taking advice. And when Marty and I were set out from Lausanne, Switzerland, to pioneer or to establish the work of YWAM here in England, boy, we took advice from everybody we could. And Lauren was the primary one with experience. So, we said, okay, yeah, he challenged us, would you pray about going to England? We said, yes. Then we started saying, what shall we do? How shall we do it? How do you do this? How do you do that? And as a leader, no matter how old you are, how experienced you are, you need advice. In new ways, and that requires gaining expertise you don't have yet. So the question went on, what's wrong with the hierarchical systems that most of us have now? Well, I wouldn't say it's wrong, it's just, I think there's a better way to see leadership emerge, that's all. And if we're going to see the mission force multiplied by 10 times, 50 times, 100, the whole mission force, to where there aren't 500,000 missionaries, but there are more like 500 million missionaries, there's got to be just a whole lot more people happy and comfortable to take responsibility, exercise authority, and for other people to be gathered around them, and then for more leadership to be developed. So what we're trying to do is create an environment where at every local level, people can develop leadership. That means they're trusted to make decisions. They're trusted to take advice and be wise. They are trusted to do new things in new ways. We can champion young people because we have an environment in which they are able to take initiative and yet not be chaotic, not do things that are foolish. And that kind of comes down to one of the next questions. Yeah, the question about, well, what happens when those people end up doing unwise things or dangerous things, or they're not compliant? Well, there are two ways of dealing with that. One is to have command and control systems in place where you always know what everybody's doing, and you can immediately step in and correct things if they begin to be irresponsible. But that just squashes people. The other way to do it is to ingrain people with the fact that they're free to make decisions, but not without taking advice. And then all the people with areas of expertise, such as visas, the technicalities of getting and keeping visas, or safeguarding, keeping children safe, keeping them vulnerable safe, or accounting, or the law regarding nonprofits or the law regarding NGOs. The people who know all this stuff become advisors. They become the people who those taking initiative know they got to go to. And as Lalou says, the only thing in these organizations that people can get fired for is not taking advice, not seeking advice. Now, it doesn't mean they always have to take advice. I was talking to a young person in another place some time back, and they talked about how they'd had this vision and they wanted to do this particular thing, and so they went to the committee in charge of those areas and said, I want to do this particular fitness vision, and this is how I want to do it. And the group, 6, 7 people said, have you thought about this? No. Have you thought about that? No. Have you thought about what happens when this goes wrong? Have you thought about how you might damage that? And when I talked to the young guy, he was really demoralized. Why? Well, because some people who were very responsible were taking their responsibility seriously and wanting to make sure that he didn't mess up. What should have happened? Well, he should have gone to them as he did And they should have said, great, good idea. You have to work out the areas of liability and health and safety and so on, but we'll help you do that. We know you don't know all that, but we'll help you do it. Or if we don't know what to do, we'll point you to the person who does. So we'll support you in it. That's a really important lesson for us to learn in all of YWAM. So that those people with expertise are known for their expertise, and they are known to be helpers. One of the questions that always arises, well, if we're all in teams, how do we get the administration done? How do we keep the accounts in order and all that? Well, that's a team. You have a team that really is the team that makes sure that everything is done well. But what are they? They are advisors. You can make sure that any given team, if it has enough activity and members in it, they're taking care of personnel issues. They're taking care of visa issues. They're doing it through the right channels because they've been told and they've been helped and advised to do it. So there's a way to do it without having command and control. And that, I think, is one of the big finds of this particular book and really relevant to us. So another comment or question. We often see a nation, a YWAM nation with strong national leadership, and it gives security of reputation. What happens when people really mess up and they threaten the reputation of the entire work? It's a big issue. And we'd be foolish to say, oh, well, we're not concerned about that. I do often say to people who criticize us, look, we give a lot of opportunity to 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And you may see us making the same mistakes, but it's not. It's the next lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds. But we're not going to quit giving them opportunities just for the sake of our reputation. But you see, if we really ingrain this advice taking, where everybody knows, let's see, before I do this, I need to ask advice. And if the advice givers, the advisors, are really servant-hearted, then I think it's a better way of protecting reputation than having a high-profile personality who, in effect, is the embodiment of your reputation, because that so often comes unraveled. Another really good question. How are we doing? We got about 6 or 7 minutes left. If YWAM's called to release people in all spheres of society, how is God's way of moving into a flat structure? How does it work in business and politics? And the answer is it doesn't. It doesn't. This is the way I think, scripturally, the sphere of religion, the sphere of the church is meant to function. And I think one of the big differences between, say, the two biggest religions in the world, Islam and Christianity, is Islam is clearly hierarchical, and it's meant to be, and the church and the state are one and the same, and the people at the top run government and religion and everything. And the way the church is meant to work is not to be aiming for political power, not to be aiming for the power that wealth gives. The church is meant to be primarily operating in small teams. That doesn't mean it never gets together, but the early church and the fastest growing churches in history have all been churches where they were proscribed, or they were discriminated or persecuted, discriminated against or persecuted. But that's when the church really grows. The church in China between 52 and about 1997, 98 grew dramatically. Now, the fastest growing church in terms of statistics, the percentage growth, is the Iranian church. Fantastic, because they're working on intimate discipleship groups operating, and they don't have the opportunity to meet as congregations. And congregations are good. We enjoy worshiping together, but they are down in the smaller groups. And that's the way we're meant to work, because Jesus is the head of the church and the Holy Spirit speaks to everybody. But business can't work that way. Well, it can in some cases, like Lalou, but government can't work that way. Government is law-based, and it has to have agents who apply the law and uphold the law. So every one of the spheres has a different kind of authority structure. And the church, if Jesus is really the head, should be the flattest of them all. But remember, there's a complete separation in terms of authority between the spheres. And when you mix the authorities of the spheres, so you bring church and religion together, or you bring business and government together, or you bring media and government together, then you get serious trouble, because these authority spheres are meant to be separate and meant to be a counterbalance to one another, so we don't end up with tyranny. Okay, so that's 4. I think we're going to get through this, folks. Might go just a little over time. Let's see. This is Brent, and he's saying we have the Clapham sect and William Wilberforce, who's often held up as the premier example of a Christian who acted as an agent of transformation in the level of government. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how the U of N is truly impacting the spheres. Where are we, and what are your thoughts on extension courses to open this up more? Are we needing to adopt models like the Clapham sect for influence? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It'd be fun to do a whole live stream on that. I'll consider that for next week. But essentially it's this. I don't think, as I read the history of it, I haven't read Eric Metaxas's book on Wilberforce. I've read his on Bonhoeffer, and I've got his one on Luther now, but I need to read the Wilberforce one. But my understanding of it is they did not have a strategy with the Clapham sect, the group of neighbors who got together. They were business, they were religion, they were government, they were media, they were the arts. Rather, they had a prayer meeting. And as they obeyed the Lord, they looked back on it, and there was an incredibly brilliant strategy for transformation. My view on the University of the Nations is we're not influencing the spheres very much directly at all, although I find that I met last week, a guy who came by here at the Oval walking his dog, and I found out that he'd been coming to our meetings when we were in Sussex in the 1970s and 80s, and he spoke of how it had impacted him. I had no idea. And then how one of his friends has gone on to be CEO of a very large global company. And so in that sense, the 85 to 90% of people who go through our DTSs and go back into another vocation are very often real world changes. And that way we're impacting it. But we need to develop the model where people who are world changers in the other spheres discover that the University of the Nations is a terrific platform for them to come, to teach, to train young people, to offer apprenticeships and internships for young people who've gone through the U of N, and it begins to be something where people are more directly trained for a particular role in a sphere like government or business or the arts or whatever, and they go into an internship where they work with other believers who are working in a transformational model. That's the way I think it should go. We are not doing that much outside of the sphere of missions and church, but we will. And extension courses, yeah, I just got off of hours of conversation with the Founders Circle and the president of the university, Marcus, talking about the U of N 3.0, and so much of it is about online learning, extension courses, and getting the balance right between community learning, where you're really developing Christian character. DTS always has to be together, face-to-face with people, sharing facilities and all the rest. But then not every course has to be that way. And they're working on that. Pray for them. They've asked for our prayers, and certainly a wonderful project to pray into. Now, I think final question here. Oh, but it's in 3 parts. So this is about when there are brand new pioneering teams that are on the ground. When forming leadership teams, is it automatically pioneering teams? No. We make this mistake often that the people who get somewhere first are the leaders. Well, they may not be the most gifted leaders, and we always need to be prepared, even if we are the primary pioneer with a team around us. We need to be prepared for God to bring leaders along who are more gifted than us. We need to be prepared to be a Samuel to the young David instead of a Saul to young David. A leader who serves and encourages and strengthens and lays hands on the young leader and watches them emerge into greater leadership than we have, rather than one who gets threatened and insecure. So, no, we got to walk in humility. And some of us who are on the leadership of something when it's small shouldn't be on the leadership of it when it gets larger. And I've seen people do that wonderfully well, who serve and serve and serve and continue to serve even when they're no longer in an official leadership role. And then a simple question about, we've been flattening our structure and doing away with titles and all. Well, what about, when we're relating to people outside and, maybe we have a PhD in something, should we put that on our card or not? And that's just a personal decision. Sometimes I agree, it's helpful to have, a few qualifications or a qualification you have listed on a business card if that's appropriate in your culture. When John Dawson and Ian Muir and I felt that God was saying, and we submitted to others, that we should do away with those roles and we should stand down, we had that discussion. And in John's context, he felt, at least for a while, I don't know if he still does it, that his card said President Emeritus of YWAM. In my context, I felt it should just be Lynn Green, Youth with a Mission. We're in different contexts, and we didn't make a rule for ourselves. We just said, do what seems to be wise and appropriate in your setting. So that's what I would say. In a way, the more God increases your influence, the less you have to have anything on your card or even have a card at all. You just are who you are. It's kind of humorous to think, well, let's see, did Billy Graham have President Billy Graham Evangelistic Association? No, he was just Billy Graham. Does Lauren have founder, chairman? No, he's just Lauren Cunningham. So the more God gives you influence, the less you need any sort of titles or anything. Okay, and finally, it says, Tom Bloomer speaking of Phase 3. Well, we're all talking about the U of N 3.0 or Phase 3. And it'd be great to have more dialogue on what that looks like. There's dialogue going on everywhere. Find somewhere, somebody in the DTS Center or somebody in the University of the Nations that's talking to others, and talk about it, because we need to keep developing the University of the Nations as our context globally changes. But I want to reemphasize something in closing. We're about reaching the world for Jesus. Training is a means to that end. Setting up the U of N is not an end in itself. It's to serve mission goals. It's to serve kingdom of God goals. We're not just about producing disciples. We are about multiplying Christ-likeness throughout the whole earth. And that means engaging in all the spheres. And that means, some places like I think one of the reasons why Kona has thrived so much is Lauren has this thing he's had on him since 2003, Scriptures for Everybody. That's the goal, not building a university campus. The university campus is furthering that goal in the most efficient way. So every location, I would ask, what are your mission goals? And if you're trying to build YWAM schools and courses and so on, don't. Mission goals, and then multiply them through training. That's how the U of N is multiplied and develops. Okay, well, thanks very much. I think we kind of finished on that. And next week we can have a fresh start on another subject, and I look forward to it a lot. In the meantime, remember, you can find this both on YouTube and on the Facebook, and you can like my Facebook page especially, and that keeps you informed when I'm doing something on it. And then on my blog, and also on Spotify. And I don't think we'll put any transcripts out, but there we go. Thanks very much. See you next week.